It all started on a freezing December evening. I was driving through the snow-covered roads of Pennsylvania, heading to my sister's cabin for a weekend getaway. It was supposed to be simple, a short trip to escape the stress of work and city life. But the weather had other plans. The snow came down hard, turning the roads into a slick, treacherous mess. My car's tires skidded on every turn, and each mile felt more dangerous than the last. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white. Continuing wasn't an option. Reluctantly, I decided to pull off the highway when I spotted a small flickering sign in the distance. Betty's Diner. Open 24 hours. The parking lot was nearly empty, and the place looked like something out of a time capsule, with its weathered sign and frosted windows. Inside, the warmth hit me immediately, carrying the faint smell of coffee and grilled burgers. A couple of truckers sat in a booth, their low murmurs blending with the hum of a jukebox playing an old country tune. An older waitress shuffled between the counter and the kitchen. I ordered a coffee and casually mentioned needing a place to stay for the night. That's when he spoke up. From the far corner of the diner, a man I hadn't noticed before turned his head. "There's a place not far from here," he said, his voice low and rough. Silver Moon Lodge, cheap and decent. His appearance was unremarkable. Scruffy beard, trucker's cap pulled low, a heavy jacket. But his eyes, there was something unsettling about them. They lingered too long, like he was studying me. My instincts told me to brush off his suggestion, but the weather outside made me desperate. I thanked him, paid for my coffee, and headed back to my car. The Silver Moon Lodge sat alone on a desolate stretch of road, surrounded by skeletal trees coated in ice. Its neon vacancy sign buzzed and flickered, casting eerie shadows on the snow. I hesitated in the car, my breath fogging up the windows. Something about the place felt wrong, but the thought of spending the night in my car felt worse. The lobby smelled faintly of mildew and old wood. A man behind the desk, Roy, barely looked up as I entered. His gruff demeanor matched the rest of the place. "Room 12, he muttered, sliding a tarnished key across the counter. He didn't ask for my name or ID, which struck me as odd, but not enough to make me leave. Room 12 was as unwelcoming as I expected. The wallpaper peeled at the corners, the bedspread was faded and frayed, and the heater groaned like a dying animal. A single dim lamp on the nightstand cast long shadows across the room. I tossed my bag onto the bed and immediately noticed something strange. The window was slightly open, letting in icy air. I shut it and double-checked the lock, my unease growing. Was it left open by mistake, or had someone been in here? Shaking off the thought, I grabbed my phone and decided to head back to the lobby to ask for the Wi-Fi password. The walk back to my room felt eerily quiet. The snow muffled all sound, and the dark forest surrounding the lodge seemed to close in. As I approached my door, I stopped abruptly. Fresh footprints led directly to my room. They weren't mine. My pulse quickened as I stood there, staring at the prints. They were deep and deliberate, like someone had been standing there for a while. I swallowed hard and unlocked the door, stepping inside cautiously. Everything looked the same, at first. But then I heard it. A faint shuffling sound from the bathroom. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I forced myself to step closer. The bathroom door was ajar, and I could just make out a shadowy figure standing inside. Panic set in. I bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind me, and ran to the lobby. Roy barely looked up as I burst in. "There's someone in my room," I shouted. He frowned, looking more annoyed than concerned. "Probably just a drifter," he muttered. "Carl will check it out." Carl turned out to be a burly man with a disconcerting grin. Together we returned to room 12, but when we opened the door, the room was empty. The bathroom window was wide open, snow piling on the sill. Carl shrugged as he closed the window. "Told you, just a drifter." As they left, I glanced outside and saw him, the man from the diner. He stood by the edge of the parking lot, his face partially obscured by shadow. When our eyes met, he smirked before climbing into his truck and driving off. Roy offered to move me to room 15, for peace of mind. I didn't want to stay, but the storm outside made leaving impossible. Room 15 was marginally better, but as I sat on the bed trying to calm myself, I noticed a piece of paper sticking out from under the mattress. My stomach dropped as I unfolded it. Scrawled in jagged handwriting were the words, "You shouldn't have come here." My hands shook as I stared at the note. Who had left it? Was it meant for me? The oppressive silence of the room seemed to close in. Then I heard a noise, a soft tapping at the window. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to look. A face pressed against the glass, pale and distorted in the dim light. It was him. I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the room, running blindly into the snow. My car was barely visible through the storm, but I reached it and fumbled with the keys, my fingers numb. As the engine roared to life, I saw headlights behind me. The truck. The truck followed me as I sped down the icy road, its headlights glaring in my mirrors. My heart pounded as I gripped the wheel, every turn a gamble on the slick pavement. The truck's horn blared, a deafening sound that sent shivers down my spine. I spotted a police cruiser parked on the side of the road and flashed my high beams frantically. The truck veered off into the woods just as the officer stepped out. The officer, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, listened patiently as I stammered out my story. He promised to check the lodge and escorted me to a nearby motel, one that felt infinitely safer. By the time I reached my sister's house the next day, I felt a fragile sense of relief. I told her everything, and she listened with wide-eyed disbelief. For the first time in hours, I felt safe, until I unpacked my bag. Inside was another note, written in the same jagged handwriting. You escaped, for now. Determined to put the nightmare behind me, I returned to Pennsylvania a week later with a friend, Mark, to confront the lodge and demand answers. But when we arrived, the Silver Moon Lodge was gone. In its place was an empty lot, blanketed in untouched snow. Confused and shaken, we asked around at the diner. The waitress gave us a puzzled look. Silver Moon Lodge? That place burned down years ago. Strange you'd mention it. A guy just like you came in last week talking about staying there. I froze. What happened to him? She hesitated, then shrugged. No one's seen him since. It started as just another night drive. I was heading from Louisville to Nashville, a trip I'd done a dozen times before to visit my sister. It was late, around 10 p.m., but I liked driving at night. Less traffic, more peace. Or at least that's what I thought. The road stretched out endlessly in front of me, the dark trees on either side creating a tunnel effect. My car's headlights cut through the darkness, but it felt like the night swallowed everything else. There was this strange silence, too. No other cars, no distant hum of engines. Just me, the low drone of my car, and the occasional crackle of static from the radio. I remember thinking it was too quiet. You know how sometimes you get that feeling like something's off? I shrugged it off, blaming the late hour and too much caffeine. I even laughed at myself, like, get a grip, Emma. That's when I saw it. In the rearview mirror, headlights appeared, faint at first, but growing closer. It was a massive truck, a semi with those glaring high beams. It didn't seem out of the ordinary at first. Truckers drive late, right? But as it got closer, something about it made my stomach knot. The truck didn't just pass me. It stayed behind, not too close, but not far enough either. I kept glancing at it, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Still, that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Why wasn't he passing? I decided to ignore it. People drive weird all the time, I told myself. But then the truck started flashing its high beams, not once or twice, repeatedly. It was almost blinding in my rearview mirror. My first thought? Road rage. Maybe I'd accidentally cut him off earlier. I didn't think I had, but who knows? I moved over to the right lane, giving him plenty of room to pass, but he didn't. Instead, he sped up and came right beside me. That's when it got really creepy. The truck had these extra lights mounted on the sides, and he used one to shine directly into my car. The beam was so bright it lit up my entire interior. I felt exposed, like I was under a spotlight. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I tried not to look, but I couldn't help glancing at the cab of the truck. The driver's face was shadowed, but I could see his outline. He was staring straight at me. Heart pounding, I slowed down, thinking maybe I could let him pass and be done with it, but as soon as I did, so did he. No matter what I did, speeding up, slowing down, changing lanes, he mirrored me. That's when I knew this wasn't just some annoyed trucker. This was something else entirely. I was officially freaking out. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. What does he want? Why is he following me? My heart pounded so hard I could hear it over the hum of the engine. Every instinct was screaming at me to get away. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my little car as fast as it would go. The speedometer climbed past 70, then 80. I glanced back, hoping to see the truck fading into the distance. But no, the bastard was keeping up, his massive grille filling my rearview mirror like some kind of mechanical monster. His headlights stayed locked onto me, blinding and relentless. I swerved into the left lane, then back to the right, trying to shake him, but it was useless. Every time I moved, he followed like he was toying with me. The road ahead stretched out endlessly with no exits in sight. That's when I realized something terrifying. I was alone. Not a single other car had passed in miles. If something happened out here, there'd be no one to help me. I pushed the gas harder, the engine whining in protest. The truck roared behind me, somehow getting even closer. For a split second, I thought he might ram me, and the panic hit like a punch to the gut. Then I spotted it, a green highway sign flashing by in the darkness. Exit 94, Elizabethtown. It was coming up fast, but it might be my only chance. I didn't hesitate. Yanking the wheel to the right, I veered onto the exit ramp at the last possible second. My tires screeched and the car wobbled dangerously, but I managed to stay on the road. The truck barreled past the exit, its horn blaring like a furious beast. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief. I'd done it. I'd gotten away, but my hands were still shaking as I navigated the ramp into Elizabethtown. The place was eerily quiet, just a scattering of buildings and empty streets. I spotted a gas station up ahead, its neon lights buzzing in the darkness. Pulling into the lot, I parked under one of the dim lights and killed the engine. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath. I stepped out of the car, my legs feeling like jelly. The night air was cool, but I was drenched in sweat. I walked around to inspect my car, half expecting to find a flat tire or some other explanation for why that trucker had been after me. But everything looked fine. No damage, no issues. Still, the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see those headlights roaring back toward me. But the road was empty. The truck was gone. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it was safe to keep going. Maybe he'd gotten bored, or maybe I'd just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I climbed back into the car, my fingers trembling as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I pulled out of the gas station, heading back toward the highway. But something still didn't sit right. And then, as I merged back onto the interstate, I caught a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror that made my blood run cold. The feeling hit me like a ton of bricks. Something wasn't right. As I glanced at the rearview mirror again, I caught movement in the back seat. For a moment, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I saw it, clear as day. A shadow. My heart felt like it stopped. There was someone in my car. I froze, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I tried to process what was happening. The trucker wasn't chasing me out of malice, he was trying to warn me. I felt a cold sweat drip down my neck. The intruder was hunched low, barely visible in the dim light from the dashboard. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. If I slammed on the brakes, he could attack me. If I sped up, I'd have no control over what came next. Then I remembered something. The Wendy's parking lot I'd passed earlier. It was a couple of miles back, and it had been brightly lit and busy. I just had to get there without freaking out or tipping him off. Swallowing my fear, I forced myself to stay calm. My hands shook as I adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, keeping an eye on the shadow in the back seat. He didn't move, yet. The neon lights of the Wendy's came into view, and relief washed over me. I slowed the car, pulling into the lot as casually as I could manage. There were a few other cars there, and the glow from the restaurant's windows felt like a beacon of hope. As soon as I parked, I bolted out of the car, slamming the door shut behind me. I shouted for help, my voice cracking with panic. A couple of people standing near the entrance turned to look, their faces confused. "He's in my car," I yelled, pointing at the vehicle. One of the men ran toward the car just as the back door flew open. A figure stumbled out, a man, scruffy and disheveled, clutching something shiny in his hand. My stomach dropped when I realized it was a knife. Before he could make a move, the man who'd come to help tackled him to the ground. Others joined in, pinning him down until the police arrived. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the curb, shaking and gasping for air. When the cops got there, they searched the man and found duct tape, zip ties, and more knives. He'd been waiting for the right moment to attack. And the trucker? He was nowhere to be found. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. The officers told me I was lucky, that without the trucker's warning, the situation could have ended very differently. To this day, I don't know who he was. Some nights, when I'm lying awake, I wonder if he was just a man doing a good deed, or something else entirely. But whoever or whatever he was, he saved my life. It was a Thursday night, close to midnight, and I was driving alone on US 322 through Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. The kind of drive where the only thing keeping you company is the hum of the tires on the road and the soft glow of the dashboard lights. I had decided to take the back roads to avoid traffic, something I'd done 100 times before. My favorite true crime podcast was playing, and for a while, it felt like just another uneventful night. Then came the ding from my dashboard. I glanced at the screen. Low fuel. Great. I opened my Maps app and searched for the nearest gas station. It showed one about 10 minutes away, a no-name station tucked into the middle of nowhere. Typical for a place like this. The road ahead was deserted, lined with trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. It wasn't the kind of road where you expect to see another car, but I didn't mind. I preferred it that way, quiet and calm. When I finally reached the gas station, it was exactly what I'd expected. Small, old, with flickering lights over the pumps and a tiny convenience store that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. There was only one other car, a rusty, beat-up pickup truck parked near the far pump. A man stood next to it filling his tank. He was tall, wearing a tattered jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He didn't move, didn't say anything, but he was watching me. I could feel it. Trying to shake off the unease, I went inside to pay for gas and grab a coffee. The cashier barely looked at me as she took my cash, and I barely looked at her. I just wanted to get back on the road. When I came back out, the man was still there, leaning against his truck, his eyes following me as I walked to my car. I avoided eye contact, filled up my tank as quickly as I could, and drove off. Not even 5 minutes after leaving the gas station, I noticed something strange. Parked on the grassy shoulder of the road, partially hidden by the trees, was that same pickup truck. Its lights were off, and it was just sitting there like a predator lying in wait. I felt a chill run down my spine. Coincidence, I muttered to myself, trying to convince myself it was nothing. I glanced in my rearview mirror as I passed, half expecting the truck to start following me. But it didn't move. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I turned up my podcast, trying to drown out my thoughts. Then another ding. This time my dashboard showed a low tire pressure warning. I groaned. First low fuel, now a flat tire. Could this night get any worse? The wobbling sound confirmed it. I pulled over, got out of the car, and walked around to check. Sure enough, the rear driver's side tire was completely flat. But as I looked closer, my stomach turned. It wasn't just flat. It had been slashed. My mind raced back to the man at the gas station. Had he done this? And if he had, was he nearby? I grabbed my phone and opened my roadside assistance app, but the signal was weak. I tried dialing 911, but the call wouldn't go through. The road was dead. No cars, no people, just me and the endless darkness. That's when I heard it, a low rumble, the sound of an engine starting. I turned toward the road, my eyes scanning the darkness, but I couldn't see any headlights. The sound grew louder, then stopped. I felt my chest tighten. Was it him? Was he watching me? Panicking, I opened my trunk and grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight my dad had given me. Its beam cut through the darkness, and that's when I saw it. The pickup truck, parked just a little further down the road. Its headlights were off, and it was angled toward the trees, almost as if it was trying to stay hidden. I backed away, heart racing. I needed to hide. I slipped into the woods, crouching low behind a tree, my flashlight turned off to avoid being spotted. My phone's screen showed no service, leaving me completely cut off. All I could do was wait and hope he'd leave. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Then I heard a car, a different vehicle this time. Headlights illuminated the road, and the sound of tires slowing down made my heart leap. Someone else was here. The pickup truck's driver stepped out, waving at the approaching car. "Need some help?" he called out, his voice loud and casual, like nothing was wrong. I crept closer to the edge of the woods, just enough to see what was happening. The new car was a black sedan, and its driver, a younger man, stepped out cautiously. The two started talking, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. The man from the pickup gestured toward my car, likely spinning some lie about a stranded driver. My gut told me I couldn't let this continue. If I stayed hidden, who knew what would happen next? I bolted out of the woods, shouting, "Help, he slashed my tire." Both men turned to look at me. The driver of the sedan looked confused, but the man from the pickup froze, his face twisted into a mix of anger and panic. "What's he talking about?" the sedan driver asked, stepping back slightly. The man from the pickup shook his head, his voice defensive. "I don't know what he's saying. Never seen him before." "Bullshit," I shouted. "You followed me here." The sedan driver didn't look convinced by the man's denial. He crossed his arms, glaring at him. "Then why are you out here?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he backed away toward his truck, muttering something under his breath. He climbed in, started the engine, and sped off, tires screeching. The driver of the sedan turned to me. "You okay?" I nodded, still trembling. "Yeah. Thanks for stopping." We both turned as the sound of sirens approached. A police cruiser pulled up, its lights flashing. The officer stepped out, hand on his holster, and quickly assessed the situation. I explained everything. The gas station, the slashed tire, the man following me. The sedan driver backed up my story, describing how the man had tried to lie about what was happening. The officer promised to check the gas station's cameras for evidence. "You did the right thing by hiding and calling for help," he said. As I waited for the tow truck, the officer stayed with me, his presence finally making me feel a little safer. But even as the night ended, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't really over. Somewhere out there, that man was still lurking. I'll never forget that night. It wasn't just scary, it was something out of a nightmare. I was 29, on winter break from teaching in New York City, and driving to Vermont to see my boyfriend Ben. We'd been doing long distance for about a year, and these trips were how we made it work. It was supposed to be an easy drive. Sure, there was snow in the forecast, but I figured I could beat the worst of it. My car, an old 2010 Ford Focus, wasn't exactly built for snow, but it had gotten me through worse before. As I headed north, the weather turned fast. The snow came down heavier, and the roads became treacherous. Visibility was awful, and even with both hands gripping the wheel, the tires kept slipping. I'd heard the blizzard warnings earlier in the day, but I'd shrugged them off. Now, every mile felt like a mistake. By the time I reached Brattleboro, Vermont, I knew I wasn't going to make it to Ben's place that night. The snow was relentless, and the thought of sliding off the road terrified me. Just as I was considering pulling over, I saw the warm glow of a diner through the storm. The diner felt like stepping back in time. It had that old-fashioned charm. Red vinyl booths, a long counter with spinning stools, and a waitress who looked like she'd been working there forever. Her name tag read, Linda. I slid into a booth near the window and ordered coffee and a sandwich, trying to shake off the chill. Linda brought my food, and noticing how shaken I looked, struck up a conversation. "You shouldn't be out in this," she said, shaking her head. "It's only going to get worse. There's a motel a couple miles up the road. Nothing fancy, but it's cheap and warm." I nodded, grateful for the suggestion, but before Linda could walk away, a man sitting at the counter swiveled around in his stool to face me. "Actually, there's a better place closer," he said, smiling. Something about him felt off. He was in his mid-30s, maybe, with unkempt hair and a jacket that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. He had a beer in his hand, which struck me as strange in a diner. "Name's Travis," he said. "Michelle," I lied, not wanting to give him my real name. "There's a place just a couple minutes from here," Travis continued. "Real cheap, real quiet, you'd like it." His eyes lingered on me a little too long, and my instincts screamed to leave. Linda came back with my check, giving Travis a look that told me she didn't trust him either. "Thanks for the suggestion," I said politely, quickly paying and heading back out into the storm. The snow had piled up while I was inside. It took me a few minutes to clear my windshield before I could drive. Following Linda's directions, I found the motel she mentioned, a rundown building with a flickering neon sign. The parking lot was half buried in snow, but there were a few other cars there. Inside the lobby, the man at the front desk barely acknowledged me. He handed me a key to one of the downstairs rooms without so much as a smile. I wasn't expecting luxury, and that's exactly what I got. The room was tiny, with faded wallpaper, a red carpet, and a bed that looked like it had seen better decades. I dropped my bag on the floor and tried calling Ben, but there was no reception. The motel had Wi-Fi, but the password wasn't in the room, so I bundled back up to get it. As I stepped outside, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. There was a new car in the lot, a black sedan parked near my room. Its windows were fogged, but I could just make out the outline of someone sitting inside. I hurried to the front desk, got the Wi-Fi password, and went straight back to my room. Once inside, I locked the door and FaceTimed Ben. The connection was terrible, so we switched to texting instead. That's when I heard it. A soft noise, like something shifting, coming from the bathroom. I froze. The bathroom door was closed, but I couldn't remember if I'd left it that way. My heart started pounding. Me. I think someone's in the bathroom. Ben. What? Did you lock the door when you got back? Me. I don't think so. Panic set in. I realized I'd left the room unlocked when I went to the front desk. Grabbing the room key, I slipped on my shoes and opened the door a crack to test the lock. That's when I saw them. Fresh footprints in the snow leading from the black sedan to my door. And the sedan? The driver's seat was empty. I slammed the door shut, locking it this time. My hands were shaking as I texted Ben, trying to figure out what to do. "Go to the front desk," he said. "Now." I grabbed my coat and ran, slipping on the ice as I hurried across the lot. The man at the front desk looked up, startled, as I burst in. "There's someone in my room," I cried. He frowned but didn't seem particularly alarmed. Instead of calling the cops, he picked up the phone and started speaking in another language. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Friend coming," he said. "Wait here." I stood by the window watching my room. My breath fogged up the glass as I tried to stay calm. Then the door to my room opened. My stomach dropped as I saw Travis step out. He looked around casually, like he hadn't just broken into someone's room. Then he saw me. For a moment, we locked eyes. A twisted smile spread across his face before he turned, got into the black sedan, and drove off into the blizzard. The front desk guy's friend arrived, a huge man in a battered truck. He didn't speak English, but they exchanged a few words before he motioned for me to follow him. "I give you a new room," the desk guy said. "Safer." I didn't want another room. I wanted to leave, but the storm made that impossible. Reluctantly, I followed them to a room at the far end of the building. The new room was identical to the first, but I shoved a chair under the doorknob and kept my shoes on, just in case. I barely slept. Every noise made my heart race, and every time I peeked out the window, I half expected to see Travis's car. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When daylight finally broke, I didn't waste a second. The roads were still bad, but I didn't care. I threw my stuff in the car and started driving. About an hour into the trip, I noticed a car in my rearview mirror. It was the black sedan. My hands tightened on the wheel as I tried to stay calm. He wasn't following me closely, but he wasn't backing off either. I texted Ben, who immediately called the police. "Keep driving," he told me. "Stay on the main roads." For miles, Travis's car stayed behind me. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he turned off onto a side road and vanished. When I finally got to Ben's house, I collapsed into his arms. "You're safe now," he said, but I wasn't so sure. I reported the incident to the police, but without much to go on, there wasn't much they could do. For weeks, I jumped at every noise and double-checked every lock. I knew I was lucky to have gotten away, but the fear never really left me. Looking back, I've learned one thing: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I'll never forget that drive. It was one of those nights where the world feels too quiet, like something is holding its breath. I was driving from New York to North Carolina, hoping to land a new job and maybe a fresh start. After a long day at work, I hit the road around 10 p.m., thinking I could beat traffic and make good time. I had no idea what I was in for. The highway stretched out like an endless ribbon of asphalt, the trees on either side leaning in, almost like they were watching me. I was exhausted, my eyes burning as I squinted into the darkness. The hum of the engine and the faint drone of the radio were the only sounds keeping me awake. Then I saw him. At first, I thought it was just my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But no, there he was, a man standing on the shoulder of the road, perfectly still. He was wearing a black suit, the kind you'd expect to see at a funeral or a wedding, not the side of a highway in the middle of the night. His face was half hidden in shadows, but I could feel his eyes on me. It sent a chill down my spine. I gripped the wheel tighter and debated stopping. Maybe he needed help, but something about him didn't sit right. He wasn't waving me down or anything, just standing there watching. The thought of pulling over made my stomach turn, so I kept driving. But the further I went, the harder it was to shake the image of him. Who stands on a deserted road at night just staring like that? I tried to brush it off. Just some guy, I told myself. Probably had car trouble or something. But the nagging unease lingered. The coffee in my cup holder had gone cold, and I was fighting to keep my eyes open. The radio wasn't helping either. Every station seemed to be static or faint music that barely reached the speakers. About an hour later, I saw him again. This time, he was standing right in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes so hard the tires screeched, my heart pounding like a drum. But when the car stopped, he was gone. Just gone. I sat there in the middle of the highway, my hands shaking on the wheel. My headlights stretched out into the darkness, revealing nothing but asphalt and trees. No sign of the man in the suit. No footprints. Nothing. That's when my radio cut out completely. Static filled the car, loud and angry. And for a second I thought I heard something buried in the noise, a laugh. It was faint, but it was there, just enough to send another shiver crawling up my spine. Get it together, I muttered, hitting the gas and speeding off. My rational brain told me I was just overtired, maybe even hallucinating. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That man wasn't just some random guy. He was something else. The next few hours blurred together. The highway felt endless, as if I were stuck in some kind of loop. The unease never left me, and every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see him in the back seat. But it was always empty. Eventually, a gas station appeared up ahead. The glowing neon sign was like a beacon, promising caffeine, a break, and maybe some sense of normalcy. I pulled in, the crunch of gravel under my tires breaking the eerie silence. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed faintly, casting unnatural shadows on the worn linoleum floor. The attendant behind the counter didn't even look up from his phone as I grabbed a coffee and paid. My hands trembled as I poured cream into my cup. And then, I saw him. He was standing under a streetlight at the edge of the parking lot, just outside the glow of the station's lights. His face was pale, almost luminous in the darkness. Those empty eyes stared at me, unblinking. He didn't move, didn't speak, but the air around him seemed to hum with something. Something wrong. I spilled coffee on my hand, barely feeling the burn as panic surged through me. I didn't even throw the cup away. I just bolted for my car. My fingers fumbled with the keys, heart pounding in my chest, but I managed to unlock the door and throw myself inside. The engine roared to life and I peeled out of the lot without looking back. In the rearview mirror, he was still standing there, shrinking into the distance but never moving. By then I was done. My nerves were shot. My exhaustion had reached its peak, and I knew I couldn't keep driving. I spotted an empty parking lot off the highway and pulled in, figuring I'd grab a few hours of sleep before continuing. The lot was surrounded by trees, their branches tangled like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. I locked the doors, leaned the seat back, and closed my eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I started to drift off, I saw his face, those hollow eyes boring into me. When I finally fell asleep, it wasn't restful. I dreamed of him standing just outside the car, his face pressed against the window. He was whispering something, his lips moving soundlessly, but the words turned into laughter. Then came a sharp, rhythmic tapping on the glass. I woke up with a jolt, gasping for air. My heart thundered in my chest, and for a moment, I thought I saw him in the back seat. His face split into a wide, unnatural grin. I screamed, scrambling out of the car, but when I turned back, the back seat was empty. But I knew what I'd seen. When I finally reached the office building in North Carolina, I was a wreck. My eyes were bloodshot, my hands trembling as I parked and walked inside. The sleek glass and steel facade of the building felt like it belonged to another world, one where things like this didn't happen. I checked in with the receptionist, who gave me a polite smile and directed me to the conference room. The space was bright and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in an abundance of light. For a moment, I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe the nightmare was over. Then he walked in. The man in the suit. He was carrying a leather-bound folder, his expression calm and professional. But it was him. I knew it. The pale skin, the hollow eyes, the same aura of wrongness. "Good morning," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "Shall we begin?" I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My legs felt like lead, my breath caught in my throat. He smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and gestured for me to sit. The interview started normally enough. Questions about my experience, my skills, my goals. But the whole time, I felt like he was peeling back layers of me, uncovering secrets I didn't even know I had. His gaze was unrelenting, piercing. "Long drive, wasn't it?" he said at one point, his tone almost casual. "Did you see anything unusual?" My heart stopped. My mouth felt dry. "No," I lied, forcing a shaky laugh. "Just a lot of road." He didn't blink. "Good. The road can be, unpredictable." I got the job, but the relief I should have felt never came. Instead, the dread deepened. I avoided him at the office as much as I could, but no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. Every flickering light, every shadow in the corner of my eye felt like him. At home, things got worse. Doors I knew I'd locked would be ajar. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. And then there were the dreams. Dreams of him standing at the foot of my bed, whispering my name. One night I came home to find a piece of paper on my kitchen table. I didn't put it there. The words written on it sent chills through me. The road is never finished. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. It all came to a head during a late-night project at the office. I was alone, or so I thought, when the lights began to flicker. The air grew cold and I felt that familiar, oppressive presence. I turned and there he was, standing in the doorway. His suit was immaculate, his face calm, but his eyes burned with something I couldn't comprehend. "Why me?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He stepped closer, the sound of his shoes echoing in the empty office. "Because you were on the road," he said simply, "and the road always takes its toll." I don't remember much after that. Just his smile, wide and unnatural, and the sound of my own scream. I left that job the next day and moved back to New York. But I know it's not over. Sometimes I see him in my dreams. Sometimes I feel his eyes on me when I'm alone. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the road calling. You know that feeling when everything seems fine, but something deep inside you feels off? I didn't recognize it at the time, but looking back, it was there that night, nagging at the edges of my mind. It was a warm summer evening in Tennessee, the kind where the air feels heavy and crickets fill the silence with their endless chirping. I was staying with my aunt and uncle for the summer, not far from the Great Smoky Mountains. They'd always said it was God's country, but to me it was just a never-ending stretch of trees and small-town boredom. That night, I needed to get out. Just me, my dad's old Chevy, and some music on the radio. Driving helped clear my mind, and the winding back roads near the Smokies were perfect for that. The moon was out, casting a silvery glow over the endless forest. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm, free. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just let the road take me wherever it wanted. After about an hour, the houses disappeared, replaced by dense woods and fields. There were no streetlights out here, just my headlights cutting through the darkness. It was peaceful, quiet, almost too quiet. As I rounded a bend, my headlights lit up something massive blocking the road. A tree. Its roots were exposed, dirt clinging to them like it had been ripped from the ground in a hurry. "Damn it," I muttered, pulling the car to a stop. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for two cars. There was no way around it, and the shoulder was soft with mud from the storm the night before. I put the car in reverse and tried backing up to turn around, but as soon as my tires hit the edge of the road, they sank. I got out to assess the damage. The mud clung to my shoes as I stepped around the car, cursing under my breath. The tires were buried deep, spinning uselessly when I tried to move. I was stuck. I climbed back into the car and checked my phone. No signal. Great. I'd barely seen another car the whole drive, so the chances of someone coming along to help were slim. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out again. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint smell of rain and wet earth. I aimed the beam of light at the fallen tree, trying to figure out if I could move it myself. No chance. It was massive. As I walked back toward the car, something caught my eye. Tracks. Footprints, actually, pressed into the mud near the tree. They were fresh. I froze, scanning the area with the flashlight. The beam danced across the trees, but there was nothing there. The woods were dark, dense, and utterly silent. A chill ran down my spine. I got back in the car, locked the doors, and tried not to panic. After a few deep breaths, I finally found one bar of service on my phone and called a tow truck. The dispatcher told me it would be at least 90 minutes before they could get to me. "Just stay in your car," she said. "You'll be fine." Sure, easy for her to say. I leaned back in my seat trying to pass the time. That's when I noticed the deer. There were at least a dozen of them, standing in the field on the other side of the road. They were eerily still, their heads low as they grazed. At first it was almost comforting, like nature was keeping me company. Then they all stopped. Every single deer lifted its head in unison, their ears twitching as they stared at the tree line. The deer stood frozen, their bodies tense like they were ready to bolt. I rolled down the window a crack, straining to hear whatever had spooked them. At first there was nothing, just silence. Then came the sound, a faint rhythmic crunch, like something moving through the underbrush. I sat up straighter, my eyes fixed on the forest. The sound grew louder, closer, and then stopped. My heart was racing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. The deer bolted all at once, disappearing into the darkness. Their sudden movement startled me so much I nearly dropped my flashlight. Something wasn't right. I grabbed the flashlight and aimed it at the tree line. The beam illuminated nothing but trunks and shadows. I kept telling myself it was just an animal, maybe a coyote or a stray dog. But deep down, I didn't believe it. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I tried to shake it off, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore the weight of unseen eyes. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for the tow truck. Every creak of the trees, every rustle of leaves sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I turned the flashlight back toward the woods, and that's when I saw them. Two glowing dots, hovering just above the ground. Eyes. They blinked once, slowly, and then disappeared. "Okay, nope," I muttered, scrambling back into the car. I locked the doors, gripping the flashlight like it was some kind of weapon. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. The sounds outside grew louder, branches snapping, leaves crunching. Whatever was out there was getting closer, and then it stopped. The silence was deafening. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. A knock on the window shattered the stillness. I screamed, whipping my head around to see the tow truck driver standing there, his face lit up by my flashlight. "Jesus, kid, you scared me half to death," he said, chuckling nervously. The driver hooked up my car while I tried to explain what had happened. I left out the part about the eyes. He already looked skeptical enough. "This place gives me the creeps," he said, glancing at the woods. "You're lucky I got here when I did. You wouldn't want to be out here too long." "Why not?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, then said, "There's stories about these woods, people disappearing, weird sightings, stuff like that." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. As he finished, he gave me a look that sent shivers down my spine. "If you see anything or anyone, don't stop, just keep driving." I nodded, climbing back into the car. The engine roared to life and I sped off, leaving the fallen tree and the tow truck behind. The road stretched ahead of me, dark and empty. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone chasing me. And then I saw him. A figure stepped out of the tree line, right where my car had been stuck. He was tall, his face obscured by shadow, but I could feel his eyes on me. He didn't move. He just stood there watching as my car disappeared into the night. Even now, I can't shake the feeling of those eyes on me. They haunt my dreams, my every moment alone. Because now I know the truth, you're never really alone. I was stuck in a dead-end job in Chicago. It wasn't just the crappy pay or the endless grind. It was the soul-sucking monotony of it all. When I got the chance to interview for 2 promising jobs in Atlanta, I jumped at it. They were corporate positions with real benefits, great pay, and a chance to escape the brutal Midwest winters. It felt like a lifeline. Flying wasn't an option. I couldn't afford it. So I planned the 8-hour drive after work on Thursday night. It wasn't ideal, but I had no choice. My interviews were Friday morning, and I didn't want to waste any more time in Chicago than I had to. That Thursday, I rushed home after work, grabbed my suitcase, and said a quick goodbye to my parents. "Good luck," my mom said, hugging me tight. "Drive safe." Yeah, I will," I said, brushing it off. I didn't want her to see how nervous I was. The truth? I was running on fumes. I barely slept the night before, my mind spiraling with thoughts of what could go wrong. The stakes were high and I couldn't afford to mess this up. I loaded up on coffee, 3 cups before I even hit the highway. For the first few hours, it worked. The adrenaline of starting something new kept me awake, but as the miles dragged on and the caffeine wore off, I started feeling it. My eyes felt heavy, my body tense. It was just me, the dark road, and the soft hum of the engine. Somewhere in Kentucky, close to midnight, I saw him. He was standing on the side of the highway, completely still, a man in a black suit staring straight ahead. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe a mile marker or a shadow playing tricks on me. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person. His face was pale, his posture rigid. He didn't look at me as I passed, at least not at first. But as I drove by, I swear his head turned sharply to follow my car. "What the hell?" I muttered, my heart skipping a beat. I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there watching. It didn't make sense. Who stands on the side of the highway at midnight in a suit? My mind started spinning stories. Maybe his car broke down. Maybe he got into a fight and got kicked out. It was weird, sure, but I convinced myself there had to be a logical explanation. I shook it off and kept driving. About an hour later, I saw him again. I was on a completely different stretch of highway, miles from where I'd seen him the first time. But there he was, standing on the shoulder. Same suit, same pale face, same empty, fixed stare. My stomach churned. I slowed down, my foot hovering over the brake. Was he following me? How? Why? This time, I couldn't ignore the urge to stop. I pulled over to the shoulder, but as soon as I looked back, he was gone. Not walking, not running, just gone. A chill ran down my spine. My hands gripped the wheel so tight they ached. "You're just tired," I whispered to myself. "You're seeing things, that's all." But deep down, I didn't believe it. I pulled back onto the highway, my mind racing. Every shadow on the road, every flicker of light, it all felt like him, watching, waiting. I blasted the radio to drown out the thoughts, but it didn't help. The fear was gnawing at me, raw and relentless. When I saw a gas station up ahead, I decided to stop. I needed another coffee, something to snap me out of this nightmare. The station was small, dimly lit, and eerily quiet. I parked near the entrance, grabbed my wallet, and walked inside. The clerk barely looked up as I grabbed a coffee. The place felt empty, almost too quiet. As I paid, I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I turned around slowly, scanning the parking lot through the glass doors. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, under one of the buzzing streetlights, I saw him. The man in the suit. He wasn't just standing there. He was looking right at me. His face was pale, almost gray under the harsh light. His eyes, cold, empty, and unblinking, locked onto mine. I dropped my coffee and bolted to my car, fumbling with the keys as I tried to unlock the door. My hands were shaking so bad it took 3 tries to get the key in. When I finally got in, I locked the doors and sped out of the lot without looking back. I told myself I'd finish the drive, but the adrenaline wore off fast. I was too exhausted, too freaked out. So I pulled off the highway and into a random parking lot. It looked like an office building, the kind of place that's completely deserted at night. I parked far from the building and reclined my seat. I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. I told myself I was hallucinating, that it wasn't real. But it felt real. Too real. At some point, I must have drifted off. I woke up to a faint sound like footsteps on asphalt. My eyes shot open, my heart pounding. I scanned the lot, looking for him. It was empty. Then I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was in the back seat, His pale face was inches from mine, his cold eyes staring into mine through the mirror. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. Finally, I threw the door open and tumbled out of the car, landing hard on the ground. I scrambled to my feet and looked back. The car was empty. I stood there, trembling, my heart racing. Was I losing my mind? Was this some kind of waking nightmare? I didn't have answers, and I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. I got back in the car and drove. I didn't stop until I reached Atlanta. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed for the first interview. I was exhausted, but I had to push through. When the interviewer walked out to greet me, I froze. It was him. The same suit, the same face, the same cold, empty eyes. He smiled and extended his hand, and I felt my stomach drop. My hand shook as I reached out to shake his grip cold and firm. The interview was a disaster. My mind was racing, my answers clumsy and incoherent. I couldn't focus on anything except the man in front of me. When it was finally over, I bolted out of the building, gasping for air. The second interview went better. My next interviewer was a kind, professional woman, and I managed to pull myself together. A week later, I got the job. Months passed, and life got better. I moved to Atlanta, settled into my new job, and started fresh. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of someone in a suit and feel that same chill. One night, at a company event, I saw him again. Across the room, near the bar, he stood there, perfectly still, his cold eyes locked onto mine. When I rushed over, he was gone. Even now I can feel him, watching, waiting, and I know I'll never be free.